This is the future.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another Warframe video. Today let's talk about the new Warframe Dante. So first, let's talk about his abilities and how they work, beginning with his passive that turns your first ability into a codex scanner. It's really handy for new players, as they can play the Warframe and scan all the enemies so they can spawn them in the simulacrum. If you already have a max scan in the target, then it will bestow an increased status chance on that target. This is handy to Dante since he has an ability that scales well with status chance, and we will talk about that later. For now, let's proceed to his first ability called Noctua. If someone will tell you that this is the best slot for Helminth or subsumable abilities, then slap them in the face. I'm just kidding and don't take that seriously. After testing and maxing the builds of the Noctua, I find the Exalted Grimoire fun and enough to get you until Netracell levels of the game. For level cap players, this may not be enough, but for those players like me who just want to play all content in the game, then Dante's first ability is great and fun at the same time. You might get tempted to replace this ability because this is the only skill of Dante that has no important synergy in his kit. Basically, you need the Light Verse, the Dark Verse, and the Final Verse abilities if you want to take advantage of the Overguard, Nuking potential vulnerability debuffs, and more from this Warframe. I was tempted at first to do a Nuking build, as from what I have understood, Dante's Tragedy Verse will scale when you have inflicted stacks of damage over time, such as Toxin, Heat, and Slash. My main idea was to subsume Thermal Sunder to stack the Heat procs along with Dante's Slash so I could stack up a lot of DOT at the fastest time possible. The result was a bummer, so I ended up testing Breach Surge but got the same result. The Nuking capability of Dante's Tragedy doesn't scale well with abilities, but instead it's better if you are using priming weapons, which we will talk about later. Honestly, there's no point in subsuming damage over time abilities into the Warframe, as based on my tests, it doesn't do well in terms of nuking compared to the priming synergy. Another reason why you might decide to replace his first ability is that it consumes energy per shot, and if you have a high fire rate build for the Exalted Grimoire, it will drain your energy fast that you would need to include a lot of energy economy setup in your build. This is not true because I have tested it with a Blind Rage build and haven't encountered any energy problems at all. Lastly, the main reason why I highly advise not replacing his first ability with Helminth builds is because it's great when it comes to dealing damage and it has unlimited ammunition. The energy drain per shot may be a deal breaker, but the Exalted Grimoire does pack a lot of punching power with the right build and setup. Now, before proceeding to the next abilities, I would like to show you my Noctua build. The Galvanized Shot is a personal preference here, as it doesn't work with the radial attack of the Exalted Grimoire. However, it does work with the primary fire of the gun, and it does give you a massive boost in damage, especially if you are using primer setup like the Dariga Sentinel or a primary gun like the Cedo for afflicting multiple statuses to enemies. Lethal Torrent is also a personal preference, and if you want more damage, then I highly advise you go with Hornet Strike. The Heat status chance can also be replaced in this combo, but I included Scorch in here since the general build I have for Dante is not just solely focused on his Exalted Grimoire. It's a mix of support, nuking, and DPS, which I think you will love playing. Finally, I highly advise that you have Arcane Velocity in your Warframe slot, as the fire rate of Noctua is horrible. This is the first Grimoire that has slash damage, by the way, and its alternate fire deals massive radiation damage. However, I don't usually use the primary fire and prefer the high-firing primary shot of the Exalted weapon for maximum damage per second. Also, you should know that the Exalted weapon has this fragment mechanic wherein it can hit 4 enemies within 20 meters of the target. So probably you will have better kill speed against those enemies that are close to each other, and using grouping mechanics such as the Nautilus Cordon Mod precept will give you better damage output with your first ability. There's another use for Dante's Exalted Grimoire, and you can turn this into a support Exalted weapon, as there's no limit to how many tome mods you can equip in the Noctua build. By doing so, you will get all these decent buffs for you and your team, but honestly, I prefer using the Noctua for killing enemies and not just for supporting Dante. Some of the tome mods are tempting to equip, but a deck out build for killing is just my preference while using this Exalted Grimoire. Honestly, the Noctua skill of Dante is fun, and that is why you shouldn't replace it with any Helminth builds. Better yet, don't ever try subsuming anything to the Warframe, as Dante is fun without any Helminth builds. Now let's proceed to his second ability called Light Verse. This ability will give you Overguard per cast, and if you cast 2 Light Verses and then cast the Final Verse, it will give you bigger Overguard numbers until you reach the maximum cap. The best part is the Final Verse of Light Verse, called Triumph, will also give you Overguard regeneration per second. The higher your power strength value is, the higher the regeneration. Now, the ability also promises maximum health increase not only to Dante, but to his allies. However, I don't see this working at the moment, and the only thing I see is the Overguard generation. I think this is just a bug, and it will be fixed soon, or if I missed a special mechanic to activate the max health bonus, then feel free to call me out in the comment section below. The increase in health values will be huge, as you won't need to put any vitality mods in your build, and then there's Overguard that serves as an extra layer of health, as well as status immunity not only to Dante, but also to his allies, including all the companions present in the mission. Without the increase in health values, though, Dante is still tanky as hell, as he has a crowd control ability that can aggro enemies as well, and also both the Light Verse and Final Verse give Dante invulnerability while casting. When your Overguard gets depleted, then you can still rely on the shield gating mechanic, and then you can just cast either Light Verse or Final Verse to make you invulnerable and restore your Overguard again. This is a crazy survivability setup, and this is the first time I haven't complained about the survivability of a new Warframe. Moving on, let's talk about the Dark Verse. This is the main main damage nuke of Dante, and what it does is it deals slash damage in a wide area, and if you have 2 dark verses and then cast the final verse ability, it will then trigger Tragedy, which allows any damage over time effects that the enemies have suffered to accumulate in one single blast. In my opinion, this is basically Expedite Suffering from the helmet system, but with steroids. This is the main reason why you should stack damage over time, such as Toxin, Heat, and Slash, and like what I have said earlier, the combo is more potent with primer guns compared to subsuming abilities like Thermal Sunder. The nuke damage can sometimes reach millions if you have stacked a lot of damage over time to enemies. Take for example if you are using Cuva Nucor with this build, plus the secondary Encumber Arcane that grants additional statuses. What you want to do is fire the Cuva Nucor to somehow stack the Heat proc, accompanied by the Viral stack that also increases the overall nuke damage. After that, cast 2 dark verses, and then cast the final verse to nuke enemies. This is a good synergy for a nuking setup, but if you are using the Noctua, then you can't use Dante's equipped secondary though. There's a solution to this, and that is the ever reliable Cedo. If you want to use the nuking part of Dark Verse, but also want to have fun with Dante's first ability, then all you need to do is equip a Viral Cedo. Just simply swap from Noctua to Cedo, then fire its alternate fire. After that, all you need is to cast 2 dark verses and cast the final verse to nuke enemies. The good thing about Dante's abilities is it has both a wide area and a long duration. With just stretch and prime continuity, you will have enough range to nuke a room with his dark verse and keep the buffs of his other verses. The downside of the nuking setup though is that the primer gun doesn't cover enough enemies in the room, and you can't nuke all those enemies that got primed. This was the final nail in the coffin of why I decided to play the Warframe for a balance of support, DPS, and nuking, instead of just focusing on the room cleaning part of the frame. Now there are 2 buff verses that you can combine, and these are Word Warden and Page Flight. If you cast a light verse followed by a dark verse, then you will receive the Word Warden buff that grants everyone their very own Noctua that synchronizes to their attacks. At first, you will definitely think that Word Warden is the weakest verse of Dante, as the clone Grimoire doesn't deal that much damage. However, the damage is not the most important part of Word Warden, but the mechanic wherein it can inflict the statuses from your Noctua's build. So if you have modded for Viral in your Exalted Grimoire, then you can give a budget meal nourish that allows every attack to somehow proc Viral to enemies. This is the reason why, aside from Viral, I also added Heat in my Exalted Grimoire's build so that it can help me spread the statuses fast in a team composition, making it easier for me to deal good damage with my Tragedy skills nuke. The last verse you can use for Dante is combining dark and light verses, then casting the final verse. This will give you Page Flight, which is an awesome skill for the Warframe. First of all, it gives damage vulnerability to enemies, and it's like Seva Goth's Reap ability that seeks out enemies and inflicts damage vulnerability. The only difference is that Page Flight is a status vulnerability debuff, which means enemies are more vulnerable to status damage, and this greatly increases the damage over time that you deal. The debuff allows you to deal more damage to all sources, and Page Flight also has this awesome crowd control mechanic that draws away enemy attacks from you and your allies. Honestly, all the verses of Dante are handy as they can let you deal damage, support your team, and keep you at your feet from beginning to end of the mission. So far, I have no complaints about the Warframe, and that is why I dubbed it as the perfectly created Warframe this year. The only thing that is missing in the Warframe is the maximum health buff, and if this gets added, Dante will be more than just a Wisp Daddy Warframe. And finally, let me talk about the build I'm using for this Warframe. You might have seen a glimpse of this build earlier, but let me explain to you every mod I have included in the build and how they work for the Warframe. You can replicate this build by spending 3 Forma, and this is a versatile build that you can use for solo or team missions. I was hesitant adding Blind Rage at first, as it will surely fuck up my energy economy for my first ability, but the combination of Arcane Energize plus these 2 efficiency mods are more than enough to not just continually shoot my Exalted Grimoire, but also to cast all the verses of Dante. With this amount of power strength, the slash and radiation damage of my first ability gets boosted, not to mention that the slash from Dark Verse also gets boosted. In addition, I get more status vulnerability debuff, more overguard regeneration and values, and as well an increased damage multiplier in my Dark Verse nuke. For the duration and range, I only added prime continuity and stretch because, as I have said earlier, Dante has decent base duration and range, and you only needed these 2 mods to make the Warframe exceptional in real mission scenario. Before we proceed to the end of this video, I would also want to share a messed up Dante build that I want to pursue in the future. This build focuses more on his Noctua ability, and I will remove a lot of useful verses in the process. However, please let me explain how this build works. Currently, I'm missing Helminth resources to subsume Nourish and replace Dark Verse instead of the Exalted Grimoire. By removing Dark Verse, I will have no option of using Page Flight, Tragedy, and Word Warden buffs for the Warframe. This is stupid, I know, but for this setup, I only needed the Overguard for survivability, and having the Final Verse intact will give me enough Overguard and regeneration to survive. Not to mention that both Light Verse and Final Verse has invulnerability per cast, so this is why I want Dark Verse out of the picture instead of these abilities. By subsuming Nourish, I can make a Corrosive and Heat build in my Exalted Grimoire, and the Viral status will just be added by the Nourish ability. I want Corrosive since I'll be adding 2 Emerald Archon Shard in the build to increase the maximum Corrosive stack, allowing me to strip all the armor of enemies. This will be huge for the Noctua build, and the damage will be boosted further with enemy armor out of the picture. By the way, if you can, please add at least 2 tau forged yellow Archon Shard in your Dante to increase its casting speed. The Warframe is better with casting speed, and in any Dante build, I can't live without the casting speed buff from either natural talent or the Archon Shards. Finally, I will be adding 1 violet tau forged Archon Shard for the mini equilibrium effect to help in my energy economy. It's not needed, but it's a luxury to have in my build. Basically, what I want Dante to be is a Warframe wherein I can select and just load instantly into the mission. Now, there are other armor stripping methods in the game that are actually better than the Emerald Archon Shard. There's the Unable Focus or simming abilities such as Pillage. However, based from experience, these kind of setups are only good in endurance or endless types of missions. You will definitely stop to cast these defense stripping feature, and worse, you might need to group enemies in place so you can hit multiple targets at once. What I'm planning to do with my Dante is turn him into something like my Wisp, which has a good killing setup while on the move and allows me to dive into bounty missions, capture missions, or any missions in the game without worrying that I needed a specific mechanic to further boost the effectiveness of my Exalted Grimoire. As you can see, I really love Dante's first ability, as if you can manage the energy economy, the Exalted weapon has damage potential, and it doesn't require any reloading and ammo economy setup. Overall, Dante is a solid Warframe with and without Helminth builds, and if I were to rate him, I would give him 9 out of 10. Not a perfect score because of the way he looks, and I am hoping that we will be getting cool cosmetics soon to this Warframe so we can enjoy it better. Honestly, looks doesn't matter and my rating is just biased, but overall, the Warframe is great. I can't consider him as a meta Warframe though, as most of his abilities are derived from previous Warframe, but Digital Extremes managed to pull all the good stuff and place it into Dante. Is a Warframe that is fun to use and versatile, so you can use him in any missions that you want in the game, except for spy missions, of course. So that is my thoughts and build for Dante. If you have a different opinion or would suggest a different build, then feel free to share it in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next video. Squad Leader, signing off.
This is the future.